There is a set of stripes that has appeared on more championship-winning race cars than almost any other cars in the history of motorsport. 3 colors, a dark navy blue, a bold red, and a pale sky blue, arranged in diagonal bands across a white background. No flashy logo, no aggressive typography, just stripes. And yet, for nearly 5 decades, those stripes have been associated with some of the most successful racing programs the world has ever seen. This is the story of Martini Racing, a brand that moved from Formula One to rally, from endurance racing to sports cars, and left a trail of championships across every discipline it touched. Today, we're going to break down exactly how it happened, why it worked, and why the Martini livery is still considered the gold standard in motorsport branding. Before we get to the racing, you need to understand where Martini came from, because it's not a motorsport company. It never was. Martini and Rossi was founded in Turin, Italy in 1863. The company made vermouth, a fortified wine infused with botanicals, and it became one of the most recognized spirits brands in the world over the following century. By the 1960s, Martini was a household name across Europe, particularly in Italy and across the Mediterranean. But in the late 1960s, the global advertising landscape was changing. Television was growing, live sports broadcasting was expanding, and Formula One, which had been running since 1950, was starting to attract massive international viewership. That was the moment that tobacco and alcohol companies began to see motorsport not just as a sport, but as a global advertising platform. Martini and Rossi moved quickly. In 1968, commercial sponsorship of Formula One cars was officially permitted for the first time. That same year, Lotus ran the famous gold leaf livery, the first fully branded F1 car. Other companies took notice immediately. By 1972, Martini and Rossi had entered motorsport as a title sponsor. Their first major partnership was with the Brabham Formula One team, and shortly after, they began building relationships with Porsche and Lancia that would define the next 2 decades of motorsport history. What made Martini different from the start was their approach to branding. They didn't just put a logo on a car, they created a visual identity for the entire race program. The livery, the team trucks, the crew uniforms, the pit equipment. Everything matched. This level of branding consistency was genuinely ahead of its time in motorsport. Let's talk about the design, because a lot of people appreciate how the Martini livery looks without fully understanding why it works so well on a race car specifically. The livery is based on the label design from the Martini vermouth bottle, which itself dates back to the early 20th century. The diagonal tricolor stripe pattern, navy red and light blue, was taken directly from that packaging and adapted for use on vehicles. On a race car, those diagonal stripes do something very specific. Because race cars are photographed and filmed at high speed, the angled lines create a visual effect that makes the car look fast even when it's standing still. The contrast between the stripes and the white base is extremely high, which means the car is instantly identifiable in photographs, television footage, and at a distance on the circuit. The design also scaled remarkably well across different types of cars. Whether it was on the long, flat nose of a Porsche 917, the wide fenders of a Lancia Stratos, or the narrow chassis of a Formula One car, the stripes adapted without losing their identity. That versatility is one reason it became so ubiquitous across multiple racing disciplines simultaneously. The first truly iconic chapter of Martini Racing's history is tied to Porsche, and specifically to the 24 Hours of Le Mans. Porsche had been a force in endurance racing since the late 1960s. Their 917, to a 12-cylinder monster producing around 600 horsepower, had won Le Mans in 1970 and 1971. By the mid-1970s, Porsche was developing the 935 for the new Group 5 regulations, and Martini came on board as a primary sponsor. The Martini Porsche 935 is one of the most recognizable race cars ever built. It ran from 1976 onward and dominated the World Championship of Makes. Porsche won the championship with the Martini liveried 935. The car continued to evolve, getting wider, more aggressive, and more powerful over the following seasons, but it always carried those distinctive stripes. In 1977, the Martini Racing Porsche 936 won Le Mans outright, driven by Jürgen Barth, Hurley Haywood, and Jackie Ickx. It was the first of what would become a long tradition of Martini liveried Porsches succeeding at the most prestigious endurance race in the world. The relationship between Martini and Porsche continued in various forms through the late 1970s and into the 1980s, producing some of the most photographed endurance racing cars of that era. The pairing worked because both brands had strong European identities, and because Porsche's success rate gave Martini enormous return on investment in terms of visibility and association with winning. While Martini was winning endurance races with Porsche, they were simultaneously building another dynasty, this time in rally racing with Lancia. The World Rally Championship was established in 1973, and Lancia was one of the founding participants. The Italian manufacturer had a long and successful history in rallying, and when Martini came on board as their primary sponsor, the combination produced results almost immediately. The first major success came with the Lancia Stratos, a purpose-built rally car designed with one goal in mind: winning. It was mid-engined, lightweight, and extremely agile. In Martini livery, the Stratos won the World Rally Championship in 1974, 1975, and 1976. 3 consecutive championships. The car became an icon of the rally world, and the Martini stripes were central to its identity. But Lancia didn't stop there. Through the late 1970s and into the 1980s, they continued to develop their rally program. The Lancia Beta Monte Carlo competed in the World Championship of Makes, again in Martini colors. And then came the Lancia Rally 037. The last rear-wheel drive car to win the World Rally Championship, which it did in 1983, against the increasingly dominant four-wheel drive opposition. The peak of the Martini-Lancia partnership came with the Delta HF4WD and its successor, the Delta Integrale. These cars won the World Rally Championship for manufacturers 6 consecutive times from 1987 to 1992, 6 championships in a row, and for much of that period, they did it wearing the Martini livery. The Delta Integrale is now one of the most beloved rally cars in history, and a significant part of its cultural status comes from those photographs of it sideways on gravel roads in Martini colors. The combination of a genuinely dominant car and immediately recognizable branding created an image that has stuck in motorsport history for over 30 years. Formula One was always part of the Martini strategy, but it's also the category where the results were most inconsistent. The brand appeared in F1 multiple times with different teams with varying levels of success. Their earliest significant F1 involvement came with Brabham in the early 1970s. The Martini-sponsored Brabham cars were competitive but didn't produce championship results during that period. Martini also had a brief but notable involvement with Williams in the late 1970s when the team was still in its early development phase. The most prominent F1 chapter came much later. In 2014, Martini returned to Formula One as a title sponsor of the Williams team. The timing coincided with Williams having one of their most competitive seasons in years. The FW36 was a genuinely fast car, and Valtteri Bottas and Felipe Massa drove it to 3rd place in the Constructors' Championship. The Martini livery looked striking on the modern Williams, and it reintroduced the brand to a new generation of F1 fans. The partnership continued until 2018, when Williams' performance declined significantly and Martini chose not to renew. It was a natural end to a relationship that had delivered strong results in the first 2 years, but could no longer sustain momentum as the car became less competitive. The honest assessment of Martini's F1 history is that it never produced a world championship. The brand's greatest achievements came in endurance racing and rally, not Formula One. But the visual impact of the Martini livery in F1 was always significant, partly because F1 receives the most media coverage of any motorsport, and a distinctive livery on an F1 car reaches an enormous global audience. At this point, it's worth asking a specific question. Why did the Martini livery become so iconic when other major sponsors from the same era have been largely forgotten? Part of the answer is longevity. Martini was active in top-level motorsport from the early 1970s all the way through to 2018, with various gaps. That's nearly 5 decades of presence. Over that time, they accumulated enough victories and enough famous cars that the livery became embedded in the visual history of motorsport. But longevity alone doesn't explain it. Other sponsors had long relationships with motorsport teams without achieving the same cultural status. The real factor is the combination of visual design quality and sustained winning. The Martini stripes look genuinely good on race cars. This is not a given. Many corporate liveries from the 1970s and 1980s look awkward on modern eyes. The Martini design has aged extremely well because it's built on geometric shapes and high contrast rather than on trends or period-specific typography. And crucially, the cars that carried it won constantly. The Porsche 935 and 936 won championships and Le Mans. The Lancia Stratos won 3 WRC titles. The Delta Integrale won 6. When a livery is associated with consistent winning across multiple disciplines, it becomes associated with success itself. That's a powerful brand position. There's also the matter of racing culture. In Europe particularly, the 1970s and 1980s were a golden era for motorsport, and the cars and images from that period carry enormous nostalgic weight. The Martini livery is central to those images in a way that few other sponsors can claim. There is one major reason why you don't see the Martini livery on race cars as frequently today as you did in the 1970s and 1980s, and that reason is alcohol advertising regulation. Starting in the 90s, various European countries began restricting or banning alcohol advertising in motorsport. The process accelerated through the 2000s. France banned it outright. Other major markets followed. In Formula One specifically, certain races, including the French Grand Prix and races in countries with strict advertising laws, required cars to run without alcohol branding. This created a practical problem for Martini. A livery that changes from race to race loses a significant part of its value as a branding tool. The whole point of a distinctive race car livery is that it appears consistently across every broadcast, every photograph, and every piece of merchandise. When you have to run a blank car in certain countries, that consistency breaks down. By the time Martini returned to F1 with Williams in 2014, the regulations meant that in some markets, the car had to run without the full Martini branding. The team actually developed an alternative livery, still white with blue elements, for use at restricted races. It looked fine, but it wasn't the same. This regulatory environment significantly limits where and how alcohol brands can operate as motorsport sponsors in the current era. It's a genuine structural challenge, and it's one reason why tobacco, which faced similar bans, and alcohol brands have largely been replaced by technology companies, financial services, and energy drinks as the major sponsors in top-level racing. Even with Martini largely absent from top-level racing for the past several years, the livery has maintained a remarkable presence in motorsport culture. Road car owners regularly commission Martini-style wraps for their personal vehicles. Porsche's Heritage Design Division has produced factory cars with Martini-style liveries. The Porsche 911 RSR, the 918 Spyder, and several limited edition production cars have been offered with Martini-inspired paint schemes. This is essentially Porsche acknowledging that the Martini livery is now part of their brand heritage, not just a historical sponsorship deal. In sim racing, Martini liveries are among the most downloaded community creations. In die-cast model collecting, Martini liveried cars consistently command premium prices. The Lancia Stratos and Delta Integrale in Martini colors are some of the most requested models by collectors. The livery has also influenced a generation of designers working in motorsport branding. When people talk about what a great racing livery looks like, bold, recognizable at distance, scalable across different car shapes, visually coherent as a team identity, the Martini stripes come up as the reference point repeatedly. There is also an interesting argument to be made about authenticity. The Martini livery came from a product label, not from a designer starting from scratch with a brief to make something look fast. It was adapted from the existing brand identity rather than created specifically for motorsport. And yet, it ended up being one of the most motorsport-appropriate liveries ever used. That's partly luck, and partly the fact that strong graphic design principles work across multiple applications. Martini racing spans rally, endurance, and Formula One. It represents decades of competition across multiple continents and multiple regulatory eras. It survived rule changes, category shifts, and the careers of dozens of different drivers. The cars changed constantly, from the flat 12 Porsche 917 to the turbocharged Delta Integrale to the modern Williams FW38, but the stripes stayed consistent. That consistency, built over nearly 50 years, is why the Martini livery is still the benchmark. Not because of nostalgia alone, but because of what those stripes actually represent: a sponsor that picked winning programs, stuck with them, and gave them a visual identity strong enough to outlast the racing itself. That's the world of Martini racing. If you enjoyed this video, check out our other deep dives into motorsport history. Drop a comment below. What is your favorite Martini racing car of all time? The Porsche 935, the Delta Integrale, or maybe the Williams FW36?